So we're going to be examining tonight how we transmit the culture of Krishna consciousness to others. And we're focusing on children, but this is not by any means exclusively relevant to raising children. But in general, how do we help others to imbibe spiritual culture and spiritual practices long-term in a deep way in their lives? So we're going to look at generally how do we learn culture. By the way, this is not a seminar, it's a workshop. Fun shop. So how did we learn culture? How did we learn our culture, our beliefs?
By repeating, by practicing.
By practicing, okay, somebody else? Yes? From parents, okay?
From
By
books.
seeing others.
From books.
From books?
By seeing others, associating with others.
Seeing, associating with others, somebody else?
Without our knowledge, we are immune to the surroundings.
Without our knowledge, yes, actually from the surroundings. Maybe we could be a little bit more specific. How does that work? Anyone have an idea? How does that happen? How do we just sort of get it from our surroundings or our parents?
Experiences.
Experiences, oh good.
From the society.
From the society, can anybody be a little bit more specific?
Role models.
What?
Setting an example.
Get it by other people setting an example. Okay,
Some certain authorities in their life. That's
Huh?
so important. Some authorities in their life.
Some authorities in their life observing them. Yes.
Primarily the parents actually, surrounding the family members.
Okay, parents surrounding, this microphone makes awful noise. It's really just awful. I'd practically rather not use it. Okay, so observing our parents and family. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody can hear me? Way over there? In the corner, you can hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, sir? All right, fine, good. Yes, okay, yes? You're recording, so you need the microphone, but then it's got to work properly.
Well, he's going to fix it.
You have to hold it a little closer, otherwise
I have to put it like really close, like this?
He's going to fix it up Monday.
Okay. So how does it work though? What is the process by which, you're just like around your parents and you just pick it up? Anybody have any idea how it happens?
It has to be inspiring and positive.
Inspiring and positive, okay.
You become attached
Attached to?
to certain people, and then you start acting like them.
Okay, I think we got something there.
Our association with like-minded.
Associate with like-minded people. Any other thoughts?
Really simulation.
Assimilation, but how does it work exactly? Education, okay, again, how does that work? Okay, so some sort of authority.
we learn the ideas and then we try to retain it.
Okay, we hear the ideas, we try to retain them, okay. Huh? Role models, all right. Yes?
They want to follow the parents, like what they are doing, because the parents are the first guides for them.
Okay, so children naturally are following the parents. So a lot of you talked about other people. That was a very recurring theme. Many of you mentioned other people, parents or education or role models, right? Now, it used to be in human society, somebody said example, it used to be in human society that culture could be transmitted to a large extent through example. Unfortunately, that doesn't work so well anymore. You know why? Any idea why? Just simply trying to train others in Krishna consciousness through your example is not enough? It's certainly important, but it's not very important anymore. It's only a tiny fraction of the influence. Do you have any idea why?
False ego.
Well, okay, maybe because of that.
False ego.
Oh, no, you're devotee.
Little trust in others because of the culture, or lack of culture.
Lack of trust in others. You're really coming close to where we're going to go here.
Explain the meanings and the significance.
But why do you have to do that now? Formally, you go back 100 years, and it wasn't necessary to have trust and explain the meaning of things. People generally followed the examples of their elders. And this was true all over the world. Even if there wasn't trust, even if you didn't explain anything, why is this simply no longer true?
Because schools teach them to question and understand.
Because schools teach them to question. That is a very interesting answer, which I will mull over. Okay, lack of respect, but why does it matter? 100, 150 years ago, it didn't matter if you respected your parents or trust your parents or your teachers or not. It just didn't matter. You followed their example anyway.
More external influences.
Thank you. There's so many examples. Which example are they going to follow? I mean, if you go back even when I was a child, my sisters were much older than I am, and one of them moved overseas to be in an exchange program in university, and she ended up marrying a foreigner and living overseas her whole life. And when she moved overseas, it was in the 1950s, you couldn't call, you couldn't make a transatlantic phone call. That's inconceivable to you, yes? But you couldn't call somebody across the ocean. You could only send a letter. And the letter would take 2 or 3 weeks. It would go by boat. I mean, I remember flying over for her wedding when I was 3. We went in a propeller plane. over the ocean. So the way that we communicated with her, my father bought a tape recorder, like a lot of you are recording, you just have some little thing, you know. Tape recorder at that time, it was as big as this. It was huge, and it was 2 reels. And so we bought one for her and one for us, and we would make a recording on this big tape, and we would send it over, and they would listen, and they would record, and they would send it over, and that was how we would communicate. And that was just in the 50s. Imagine, go back, you know, 1910. Right? So, go back 100 years. If you go back to 1915, did people move around very much? Did people have much to do with people from other cultures? Did most people meet people from other cultures? No. People were very insulated. You know, the news was always at least a week or 2 old if it was from a distant place. How did you know the news? You had to go to the local movie theater. You know this? To go to the local movie theater, and then the films of the news would be sent by boat. So you'd see a film of the news, of anything that wasn't local. Just 100 years ago, or less. So when society was like that, most people, unless they lived in the few big cities of the world, like London or New York, they were only exposed to a few examples. If you have a village or a town, and most people believe in the same things and act the same, you're only seeing one kind of example. You just don't see any other kinds of examples. Your parents, your teachers, your other people in the community, they're all basically following the same thing. You don't even know that something else exists. You follow what I'm saying? Right? Like one thing they found, statistically speaking, is that you're more likely to get divorced if someone you know gets divorced. Did you know that? That's a statistic. Divorce is contagious. It actually is. If you don't see it, if nobody else is doing it, it doesn't occur to you that that might be a solution. It's just not it's not in your thinking. It just doesn't occur to you at all. You follow what I'm saying? Yeah. You may know, theoretically, that maybe somebody might do that. But because it's out of your range of experience. So people growing up in that kind of culture, example was enough. If your parents, your religious leaders, your school, that people in your community all set a reasonably consistent example, all within a certain range, you would be most likely to follow that example. I mean, unless you were particularly adventurous and, you know, wanted to be in the Merchant Marine or something like that. Join the Foreign Legion. So this just is not true anymore. It just isn't true. There's very few places you can go to in the world where you are isolated from the rest of the world. Very rare. You go up in the Himalayan mountains, people are watching television and movies. Right? From America. So whatever example if you as a parents are setting certain example for your children, they're seeing another 100 examples besides yours. Of course, when they're 2, they're going to follow your example because then their world is very small. But not when they're 12. It's just not going to happen anymore. And you find that people from the cultures that were a little bit behind in terms of industrializing, they don't, especially older people in those cultures, they don't get this at all. They just don't get it at all. They think, you know, all we have to do is set an example and that's the only thing we have to do. We don't have to explain anything. We don't have to have a relationship of trust. We just have to set an example. My dear friends, forget it. Okay, that's not to say that our example is not important, but if that's all there is, forget about it. They're going to see 100 other examples. If somebody just takes a walk for 2 hours through Sydney, how many examples of lifestyles are they going to see? A lot. Yes. Isn't that correct? What to speak of if they turn on the television, or the movies, or the internet? And are you going to be able to shield people 100% from those things? Is that possible? Forget that. It's not going to work. Even if your house, there's no, television, you never go to the movies, you have heavy-duty filters on all your internet connections, or I don't know, you're one of those few families that don't have an internet connection. Find out about it at school, or from a friend, or somebody that you don't think that they'll find out about it. But there is still a very big influence of people in terms of transmission of culture. And I heard two main categories of people in your responses. One was authorities, and then the other was someone that you trust and you respect. So when do we mold our character and our behavior in order to please somebody else? What are the circumstances under which I change my character or my behavior, my speech? Yes?
When we love them.
When we love them. When we love them. And when else?
When we want something from them.
When we want something from them, yes. When that person has something that we want. In other words, when that person has some kind of power over us. Now, if that person has some kind of power over us or something that we want, do we make a deep change in ourselves? Not usually. Usually you change yourself only when they are around. By the way, dictatorships understand this principle very well. Dictatorships don't try to change people's character and behavior through love, do they, generally? No. They try to do it through power. We have something that you want, like not being in jail, not being tortured. And they know that people acting out of fear, that they're only going to change their character when the other person's looking. And as soon as the other person isn't looking, they're going to revert. So the dictatorships try to set up a system so that people at least feel that they're always being watched. They try to set up a whole culture of fear. And if they do that for long enough, then people, they're always being watched, so they always behave like that, and after a while, they do change. Of course, in time, there will be usually some sort of a rebellion in these sort of countries. But people do change. Just like in Spain, during the Spanish Inquisition, if you weren't Catholic, you would be tortured and killed. So people don't particularly like being tortured and killed, but they might have been attached to their own religion, being a Protestant Christian or being Jewish. So they would say, yes, I convert to become a Catholic, but they didn't really want to convert. So they would secretly practice their own religion of their choice. But because they had to do it in secret, it was very difficult to continue it. And after a while, in most of these families, it became empty rituals. And the children and the grandchildren, they would learn, well, we go to the basement once a week and we do this, we don't know what we're doing it for. And then generations later, they realize, oh, my ancestors were actually Protestant, and my ancestors were actually Jewish, and they were being repressed by this external force. And interestingly, after many generations, sometimes they'll try to go back to their original heritage. But that's the method of the dictator. Let me be watching you all the time. It's pretty hard to change somebody like that. First of all, it's exhausting for you if you're the authority, because you have to be watching them all the time. Anybody want to do that? I mean, you have to do that for little tiny children. But it's exhausting. And the other thing is, it doesn't tend to stick. As we said, even if you train people like that for generations, they'll sometimes go back. And the other is love. We naturally want to mold ourselves to please those people whom we love. It's a very natural function. That we will intentionally mold ourselves to please and avoid displeasing those who we love. So what do we mean by love? I mean, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time, because we could spend a whole lot of time. But if we're going to try to define love. So it's someone I love and someone I think loves me usually. Sometimes it's one way. Sometimes we change ourselves to please someone that we love and that person doesn't even know we exist. People will do that for, you know, rock and roll stars or sports heroes, right? They'll try to mold themselves like some hero who has no relationship with them whatsoever. And that's also done, you know, if some boy falls in love with a girl or girl falls in love with a boy. The other person doesn't even notice them. They may try to change themselves in order to please that person. The thinking of love as being reciprocal. We generally try to please people who we think care about us and love us, that we love and they love us. So we can think about love as three things, although I don't pretend that this is exhaustive. First of all, that you find someone fascinating. Love is something you find fascinating. Like I give the example of a woman who had a month-old baby, and she was sitting in my class, and she was looking at the baby's feet, looking at the baby's toes. So I'm sure she'd seen her baby's toes many times, but because as she had love, the baby's toes were very fascinating to her. And you'll see this, you know, young, especially young man and woman, you know, and they're just looking at each other. And everything is fascinating. So that's one aspect of love. Someone who finds you interesting. Right? We all have experience of people who don't find us interesting. We try to get them interested in ourselves and they really don't care. And then the next thing of love is that person is important to you, because we may find all kinds of things fascinating, but they may not really be important to us. So someone that you love and who loves you, you matter to them. You're not only interesting, but it matters whether you're there or not. You know, we talk about, I miss you. I mean, there are many people who I find interesting, but if I don't see them for a year, it doesn't make any difference to me. I hardly think about them. And other people, you know, if I don't see them for a while, it starts to be like, well, I'd really like to be with them. So love is someone who feels that you are important to them, not just because of what you do for them or they need you in some way or something like that, but that you in and of yourself are important to them. And again, it's best if this is reciprocal, if you feel the other person is important and they feel you are important. And then we can say a third thing about love is what we call, I've got your back. Somebody you can depend on. Somebody who will be there. Of course, nobody's totally dependable except for God. But within the limits of normal human abilities, somebody that you can depend on. Somebody who's not just what we call a fair weather friend. They're not just there when, you know, you have good health and you have money and everything's going nice. But, you know, if your car breaks down 2 hours away, maybe they'll come and get you. Right? If everybody else is criticizing you, they'll stand with you. Right? That's when you really know who your friends are, isn't it? If you've ever had anybody criticize you heavily for something, and then people say, well, yeah, see ya. And so, when there are people like that, if there's someone who finds us fascinating, we're important to them, and they're there for us, we really care about pleasing them, especially if we feel that way about them too. Their pleasure or displeasure is very important to us. And we will change our character, we will change our behavior, we'll change so many things about ourselves in order to adjust to someone that we love. So an example that I give often is that of my father. That was so nice when I met, when we were with Srila Prabhupada in '75, when Prabhupada gave me Gayatri mantra, my father became a life member of the Hare Krishna movement. And Prabhupada said, good father, good daughter. But my father, from the time I was very small, from the time I was 2 until I went to college when I was 17, he would spend every morning with me, about 2 hours every morning, just being with me. My mother would sleep until about 10. So I didn't see her in the morning. And my father would make my breakfast. He didn't cook. I don't think my father, he ran a food business, but I don't think he ever cooked a thing in his life. But he would toast the bread for me. You know, he'd toast some bread and put some butter and honey on it. He loved honey. And he would make fresh orange juice. He had one of those mechanical, orange juice wasn't electric. You still see these out in India, like a little cart, the wheeled carts, right? So he had one of those like pull down the handle, and he would make fresh orange juice for me every morning. And he'd play games with me. We had 2 dolls, and they were both named Ginger. His was named Ginger, and mine was named Ginger. And he would use his doll would teach my doll all about morals and ethics, and we would have a really good time together. You know, and because of that relationship of love I had with my father, anything my father asked me to do, I would do. From the time I was very small, he said to me, "Don't ever smoke." By the time I was 2 or 3, he said, "Don't ever smoke." And so when I got to high school, and in high school in those days, 90% of the kids were smoking. I don't think it's quite so high today because of all the restrictions on smoking. But then 90% of the kids smoked, and I didn't smoke. They would say, "Why don't you want to smoke?" I said, "Because my father wouldn't like it." And that was enough for me. And interestingly enough, I did not have that kind of relationship with my mother. Although I cared about my mother, and she cared about me, we didn't have that kind of relationship. If my mother said to me, "Don't do this or do this," I didn't want her to catch me, but I didn't particularly care whether or not she was pleased. It didn't matter so much to me, because I didn't have that kind of relationship with her. And so it's this relationship of love and trust. You know, here we have a quote about the brahmachari student under the care of the guru. And Prabhupada says that there must be genuine love for guru. He said, otherwise, why would you put yourself under the control of another person? Because, my dear friends, when there's love, there's trust. I think you mentioned trust. That I trust this person, that if I try to please them, they won't hurt me. And that doing things that will please them will be in my best interest. That this person isn't going to try to manipulate me or use me in some way. And I don't know how I can emphasize this point. Just having a title or a position doesn't make it. You may be the father, you may be the uncle, you may be the mother, you may be the grandmother, you may be the temple president, you may be the guru, you may have a name like that. It doesn't matter. Not anymore. It did. It doesn't matter anymore. Perhaps your children will be superficially nice to you. I remember seeing, even 30 years ago, in the Indian community, that the teenagers would pretend to their parents, but secretly they were doing something else. And now it's not even like that anymore. Now it's open. I mean, I think it was 10 years ago, I was on a plane in India, and one of the magazines that you know, in the back seat pocket, and there was some article that 30% of the youth in the cities in India were in an open, illicit relationship. You know, 10, 15 years before that, they were doing that, but they were trying to hide it from their parents. Now they didn't even care. So you can be the mother, you can be the father, you can be the uncle, you can be whoever you are. If there's not a relationship of love and trust, they're not going to actually try to please you. It's just the way it is. You know, and those of us who don't have children, those of us who are guiding people or whatever in Krishna consciousness, you can be, you know, the head of the ashram, the temple president. It doesn't matter what your title is. And because all of us look for these relationships of love and trust, if we don't have that with the people who are supposed to be guiding us, we will try to have it with somebody else. And this is what you'll sometimes see with kids, where they don't have this sort of relationship with either of their parents, and they start having it with other friends. And they start molding their character and their behavior to be like their friends. Or as I said, sometimes it can be a one-way street, where we're trying to impress someone who doesn't even know us. And we try to become like some famous person. Because we're thinking, oh, you know, this is someone I can have some loving relationship with. So Srila Prabhupada was very emphatic that our Hare Krishna movement should be based on this love and trust. When we have real love and trust, my dear friends, we will do almost anything to please a person that we love and trust. I mean, think of what people do out of love for their country. Unbelievable. Right? People sign up for the military. We have an expression, I don't know if you say this here in Australia, but we have an expression in America, I'd give my right arm for that. Well, people actually do that in the military. To what extent we're willing to give and to sacrifice when there's some love and trust. And when there's not, we're not. So our first principle of transmitting culture is love and trust. Can everybody say that? You can do that a little bit better. Love and trust. Oh, thank you. Very good. All right. Now, somebody said books. Yes, was that you? Said books? And I was surprised that nobody picked up on that theme. What do you think is one of the main ways that culture is being transmitted right now in the world? Through the media. Isn't it?
Yeah.
And what does that all encompass? We've got books, magazines, internet, which encompasses so many things. You know, social media, blogs, online newspapers, magazines, videos. Anybody can put together a video of something and post it. You know, commercial television, commercial movies, computer games. Have I missed anything? Huh? Regular television. Is that it? Encompass all that. Okay. Now, what do all those things have in common? They're all full of stories. Now, if we look at ancient cultures transmitted their values through storytelling. Srila Prabhupada talks about, we've quoted here, how in the villages every evening people would gather together and hear stories. I don't know if anybody does it anymore, a few people, but people used to read their children stories before they went to bed at night. And the majority of what's in the media is stories. Even the commercials, even if they're only 30 seconds long, they're generally some sort of story. Isn't it? Some kind of story. People are sad, and you know, they buy this washing machine and then they become happy. So one of the big soda companies, I don't remember if it's Coke or Pepsi, so they had these big billboards of this guy who was, you know, really thirsty, like going in the desert, you know, all bedraggled, and then he finds a bottle of soda, and he drinks it, and then he's happy. So this was their billboards. And they found when they started putting this advertisement up in the Middle East, their sales plummeted. Do you know why? They read backwards, yes. I'll give you a minute to get that one. So they read the story backwards. First the guy was happy, and then he drinks the soda, and then he's in the desert. So that's a very little story, but it's still a story. Now, why are stories so powerful at transmitting culture? I mean, if we think about some huge changes in culture, huge, 180-degree turns. So for example, when I was 14, 15, I was in a march in favor of the ecology, against pollution, against technology. And in those days, that was seen as a very subversive stance. You were against progress. I mentioned this the other day. You know, I grew up seeing a TV show where people traveled in outer space and food was created synthetically by the computers. And that was wonderful. You know, antibiotics, we're going to save the world, and we were all going to be living on Mars. I mean, they said by the time you're 12, we'll all be living on Mars. I'm way past 12 and still nobody's living on Mars. But there's been a 180-degree change. That now it's socially good to be green and to be ecologically conscious. When I was a kid, that was subversive. It was bad. It was evil. To care about this seems just so weird nowadays, but really, I swear. It was considered evil to care about the environment. You couldn't go out and buy organic food. How would you want to buy organic food? Pesticides and fertilizers were going to save the world. They were going to be the green revolution for the world. DDT was going to wipe out malaria. You all know that the animal that kills the most people every year is mosquitoes, right? It was like 6,000 people a day or something die from mosquitoes, and 5 people a year die from sharks or something like that. So, they were going to wipe out malaria. And it's now completely opposite. Completely. Now you have a higher social status if you're more ecologically conscious. Isn't that a fact? And the governments, not all the world governments, but many of the world governments are outrightly supporting ecological concerns. How did that change? By a bunch of facts? It changed by a story called Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. She wrote a story that one day in the spring there were no birds because the DDT was weakening the eggshells and all the little baby birds were dying. And it was this story that changed society. Or when I was a kid, abortion was illegal everywhere in the world. There was no such thing. I mean, it's not illegal, but there was no legal abortions. Now, what is it? 125,000 babies are aborted per day, I think, on the planet. It's like a huge football stadium. Why? Why did it change? Did anybody talk about the facts? Did anybody talk about what really happens in an abortion and little babies are being salted to death and burned to death and cut up? And did they talk about that? No. They talk about, oh, there's this 13-year-old girl and she got raped and she had to have an abortion and she died. And people change. You follow? People change. Oh, that's terrible. We should legalize abortion. And now, practically almost everywhere in the world, abortion is legal, isn't it? How did it change? It changed by stories. It changed by stories. Here's this young, unfortunate girl, and now that she had her abortion, she went and got her college degree, and she did this and that, and now she's happily married with 3 children, and she says, oh, I'm so happy I had that abortion. It saved my life. And then people think, well, I guess we should leave. And then there's the other story about the girl who died with an illegal abortion. And because of these stories, people change. And the whole culture has shifted. Or another big topic, which shall remain nameless, which again, 20 years ago, nobody even talked about it. Nobody talked about it. It wasn't even on the radar. It certainly wasn't in the open, and it wasn't legal. And now it's becoming legal, one place after another, after another, after another. Why? Because of stories. Here's Jim and John, and he's a doctor, and he's a lawyer, and they're nice, good citizens, and they pay their taxes, and they wear business suits, and what's wrong? And you read these stories, and people change. And it's gotten to the point now that you can't even talk openly about this kind of thing. Isn't it? How many years? 15, 20 years? The society, it made a 180-degree switch, didn't it? Any of you who are older, complete change in the values of a society so that the children who are growing up today will have a completely different view of this than those of us who are older. Completely. It'll be a totally open and accepted part of society. Am I correct? How did that happen? Is it through facts? I don't think so. People are actually talking about, well, it's really like this and it's really like that, and that's not what it is. They're telling stories. So how powerful are stories? They can change the values of an entire culture very, very quickly. They say people change their opinions only for 2 reasons. They say people do not change their opinions for facts. They change their opinions either to follow someone they love and respect or through stories. There's actually research that shows that if you present facts to try to change someone's opinion, you will cement them more firmly in their current position. You ever had that experience and wondered what's going on here? That's the research. So why are stories so powerful? Why do they change us? And the research on this is just absolutely fascinating. So some of you may know that athletes, when they want to practice, they don't just go out and physically practice. They also mentally practice. Did you know that? Someone's a tennis player, they can just sit in a chair and they don't move and they just imagine now in their mind that they're swinging the racket and hitting the ball. And if they hook up sensors to the brain, they find out into the body, they find out that the muscles in the body are working 2/3 as much as they would if they were out on the tennis court. And they're actually working as if they were hitting the ball. I'm sure we've all mentally practiced for something before we did it. You mentally practice for an interview, you mentally practice for something, and it makes you better at it. Now what happens when you hear a story? You identify with the people in the story, and it's as if you're doing that. And they've done interesting experiments that if the character in the story puts down their jacket, and then later on talks about their jacket, you mentally go searching for it as if you put down your jacket. When we watch, read, or listen to a story, we get 2/3 of the experience we would get if we were factually living that story. So whatever values, whatever culture, whatever beliefs are being experienced by the characters in that story become ours. Is that fascinating? Absolutely fascinating. Now the other nice thing about stories is that they bypass the general resistance people get to a direct instruction. Okay, so I'm going to assume everyone here is honest. I'm going to assume we don't have any thieves here. I hope we don't have any thieves. But anybody here would like to say I'm 100% honest in all circumstances? Anybody? No. Haven't met anybody willing to say that. So let's say I just admonished you all with direct experience, with direct instruction. Why aren't you honest? Don't you know how important? You should be honest. Does that inspire you? Are you going to be one iota more honest when you leave this room by my doing that? In fact, we put up a block, don't we? Why is she picking on me? I'm just sitting here. I just happen to sit in the front. Next time I'm going to sit in the back. I mean, it just doesn't affect us. Not only does it affect us, it increases our resistance. It's amazing how many times adults try to instruct children like this, or anyone tries to instruct them, you should do this, and you should do this because of this, and this, and this. Do we respond to this kind of instruction? Almost never. Very, very, very rarely. About the only time I think of when we respond to it is if, you know, we already have such a deep, loving, and trusting relationship with the person that we'll take almost anything from them, but it's very rare. Oh, but if we tell a story, that's a whole different thing. We tell the story about the boy who was guarding the sheep. You all know that story? The boy who was guarding the sheep and he was really bored. So boring. Watching sheep is pretty boring. They don't do anything exciting ever. And he was bored. And so he went into the town and said, there's a wolf, there's a wolf, there's a wolf. The guys get out there, bows and arrows with their guns or whatever it was, you know, and they go out, where's the wolf, where's the wolf? He was over there, he was over there. Don't see any footprint. He was there, right? Okay. Go back to the village. And the boy thought, oh, that was fun. You know, and a few weeks later, these sheep. All right. That was really fun the other day. I think I'll do that again. So he goes into the village. There was a wolf! There was a wolf! And they come with all their weapons. And this time they looked a little bit more carefully. They got no footprints, nothing. You sure there was a wolf? Oh, yeah. All the sheep ran over there. I was really scared. Okay, they go back to their village. And he does it again the next week. And then you all know what happened, right? One day there was a real wolf. And he runs into the town, there's a wolf, there's a wolf. Now be quiet. So what are you more likely to listen to? Hey, you should be honest. Or a story. As soon as we hear a story, our defenses go down. Because it's not about me, it's about some boy with some sheep. It bypasses the the guard, you know. Nobody had better criticize me about anything. It goes behind the guard. You know, the guard says, oh, it's a story, let it in. So it bypasses this conscious self, you know, false ego resistance. By the way, that's especially true if it's a story told by somebody to somebody to somebody to somebody, because then it's even less likely to be about me, right? And the Bhagavatam is like that. You know, it's the sages at Namasaranya from Sutta Goswami, and inside that is Parikshit and Sukadeva, and inside that there's a story within a story within a story within a story within a story. So we should be very careful. What stories are people exposed to? If someone's exposed to stories, I mean, a lot of what goes on in the media, we would never want to actually experience, would we? You know, people are watching movies about gun battles and explode. Would they really want that going on? Would you really want to be experiencing that? So a lot of the stories that we expose ourselves to, or our children to, are damaging their character and their morals, and certainly damaging their spirituality. So we want to saturate ourselves and anyone we're guiding and our children with the proper stories. With stories about the spiritual, at least stories about goodness. And even when they're young, you know, you don't need to give them so many stories about muff and puff and whatever, you know. You can give them stories about Krishna. So our first thing was again? And the second one is? Stories. So what is it again? Stories. All right, the next one is something that we seem to have forgotten about in the modern age. I don't know, it was such an intuitive thing not that long ago. Prabhupada talks about how the children should be trained to do whatever the adults are doing. Now, all of us living beings, and especially in the human form, we all want to feel that what we're doing is important. It's very hard to be inspired to do something that's not important, that's not valued. We all want to know that our life has some kind of meaning. It's one of the great needs, actually, of the soul. And I think that people who take to spiritual life have this need very acutely. That we really don't want to have a meaningless life. We don't want to have a life that can be summarized in one sentence in the newspaper. You know, Joe died, he's survived by his wife and 2 children, the funeral is at 2 o'clock. We don't want that to be our whole life. Right? We want there to be some meaning. And people will be part of any group or any endeavor that will give their life meaning. We look for where is that place, where is that group, where is that philosophy that can give my life meaning. Now, in spiritual life, we're very fortunate because here we can truly give people's lives meaning. Materially speaking, it's very hard to live a meaningful life. It just really is. So I ask audiences all over the world, how many of you know all the names of your great-great-grandparents? Anybody? That means our great-great-grandchildren will not know our names. That's the grandchildren of your grandchildren. They will not know your names. And that's in your same family. It's not even strangers. What to speak of knowing what you did? All the meaningful things. So materially, it's very difficult to do things that have meaning. You can even try now, you know, go to someone who really cares about you. Now pick someone who really does care about you and say, would you like to listen for an hour while I tell you everything I did today? So materially, trying to find meaning in our lives is extremely difficult. But spiritually, everything has meaning. What is done spiritually in love of God it exists eternally. It's noted by Krishna, the most important person, who is minutely aware and concerned about anything we do on the spiritual level. And he's relishing that forever. And the other self-realized persons are also aware and relishing it. It makes a difference. It matters. It adds to the love and joy of everyone. So that we can actually give. That we can actually give. Now it used to be, not again that many years ago, even on a material level, that once somebody was 10, 11 years old, certainly by 13, 14, they were being taught a useful skill in life. This concept that you could be completely useless until you finished your bachelor's degree, and now it's moving up, you can be useless till you finished your master's degree. Right? That you don't have to do anything useful till you're like 25 or 26 years old. By the way, this is very unnatural. This is very unnatural. My own theory is that the great rise of video game playing is because of this unnatural situation. People who play video games are feeling that they're mastering something. They're becoming really expert at something. And this is taking the natural desire, especially of teenagers, to master something, to become expert at something meaningful. And because we're not giving them that, we're just not giving, the only thing we're asking them to be good at is their schoolwork. My dear friends, did you ever feel that your schoolwork was very meaningful? I mean, seriously, did you really feel it was very meaningful? No, I don't think so. Even when I was in the doctoral program, I had professors who never read my end-of-term paper. You know, they'd post my grade and I'd say, when are you going to give back my paper? Oh, I haven't read it yet. Well, how did you grade me on the board? So whoever reads it? You know, you write this 30-page paper, you write this 10,000-word paper. Nobody reads it. How meaningful is it? Just going to school and getting good grades is not going to satisfy the human's urge for meaning. And this is really one of the main reasons why our kids get involved in these other things. To try to achieve some kind of mastery. To try to say, well, at least I'm really good at something. Besides just, you know, my geography tests. And Srila Prabhupada instructed us, engage the children in the mission. What is more meaningful than spreading Krishna consciousness? And we have a lot to do. Prabhupada said, Lord Chaitanya, the Acharyas, they could have spread Krishna consciousness all over the world, but they left something for us to do. And there's a lot to do, isn't there? So much scope for using one's talent and one's ability. What you want ideally to do is that kids have meaningful work, and it should be work. We talked the other day about working according to your nature. I'm not going to repeat that. If you weren't here, I'm sorry. But ideally it should be work also according to their nature and their talents and their abilities. Something where they really feel that there's a fit between something that they love and they're good at and the needs of the world. And we can provide that really. Materially, they can only do it with height, but we can really give that. But we need to do that. And I have seen kids who want to be devotees only and solely because they have meaningful work to do in the devotee community. That one thing. Just like one devotee was telling me, oh, you know, my daughter went on the Poland tour with Indradyumna Swami, and then she decided I really wanted to be a devotee. She was saying, I think it's the total surrender, that experience of total surrender. And that is certainly true, but it's also the fact that you're doing meaningful work. That people count on you. You have to sit up the stage by a certain time. You have to do this by a certain time. And nobody says, you're only 16, that's all right, you don't have to do anything. And I've seen this over and over again. You've got a 13-year-old kid who's doing all the layout for the temple songbook. And then they're feeling, I'm a valuable member of the community. And they're getting an important, essential human need met. A spiritual need, frankly, being met. And we will go to where our needs are being met, won't we? So the third one is meaningful service. Meaningful service. I beg you, this should happen by age 14 at the absolute latest. Best by 9, 10, 11, 14 latest. If you think my kid has to put all their energy into schoolwork, schoolwork is not everything, my dear friends. And you're in Australia. It's not some outrageous competition where it's not, you don't need to do that. Okay? So, meaningful service. So we have?
Love and trust, stories, meaningful service.
Alright? Now, these are things often people guess. You guys only guess the thing about people and stories. The last one, somebody sort of guessed it when they said experiences. Oh, by the way, we would mention that in every society that we try to give our young people some kind of meaningful service at a young age also if we want to integrate them into that society. Now this thing about experiences, this is something, my dear friends, that we all know about, but I will guess that very few of us have ever really thought about it. We probably haven't thought about it much in our own lives, and we certainly probably haven't thought about it as a means of training others in culture and spirituality. So most people have some sort of certain smell that brings on an emotional state. Right? How many of you have some smell like that? What about a food, a particular food that brings on a whole emotional state? What about a particular piece of music, particular song? Okay. Other things we can have are particular places, certain times of day, certain people, and that state can be negative or positive. Okay? So those are called triggers or anchors. They're a certain sensory experience which is linked to an emotional state. It's not a memory exactly, but you feel something, yeah? You know, you smell whatever it is, cinnamon and apples, and you're just, Isn't it? Or I don't know, whatever it is, cardamom or something. You hear that song. So, how does this happen? How does this happen? It happens either from one strong experience or repeated weak experiences. Like I told you about my father in the morning. So the early morning for me, I associate with love and affection from my father. And I didn't realize that for many, 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 many years, because in the Hare Krishna movement, Prabhupada teaches us to wake up early. And I remember when I first came to the temple and the temple president said that, I said, well, I've always woken up early. But it was many, many years later when I met one devotee who told me that he really hated waking up early. And I was so surprised. I thought, how can anybody hate waking up early? How is that even possible? The morning is so wonderful. I couldn't relate. And then it was that day that I understood, oh, the reason I love waking up early in the morning is the early morning is a trigger for me. It's been connected with me to this feeling of love and affection for my father. So that was repeated weak experiences over a long period of time. Then it used to be where we lived, we had a long driveway and our mailbox was at the bottom of the driveway. So it was always a thing, who was going to get the mail. And at a certain point, I started getting the mail every day. And after that had gone on for many months, my family asked me, why do you like to get the mail? I was trying to figure out, I couldn't figure it out. Then I realized what it was. When we were building our Gurukul school, we got one donation of $35,000. And it came in as a check in the mail. And I happened to get the mail that day. And while I was standing at the mailbox, I opened the envelope and found this donation. And after that, I liked to get the mail. And it can work the other way too. When we lived in Detroit, we were in Detroit, Michigan, we were right across the border from Windsor, Canada, which had a very large Indian population. So there were many stores that sell basmati rice and things like that, or dal, the kind of things you couldn't buy in a regular American supermarkets. We'd regularly go to Canada to shop. In those days, you didn't need a passport to go over. It was an open border. So I remember one time when I went shopping, my daughter, who was then about 7, I think, she wanted to go with me. So when we went over there, we got to the shop, and she said, Mata, I don't want to go into the shop. I'll wait in the car. So in 5 minutes, I come out, and she's hiding under the dashboard. And I said, what's the matter? She said, Mata, there was some man in the parking lot, and he looked like one of those men that kidnaps little girls, and I was so scared. And she told me for years after that, if someone said Canada, she'd feel afraid. So these are how we develop triggers and anchors. We have either one strong experience, positive or negative, or repeated weak experiences, positive or negative. Now every culture tries to engineer experiences that will create these positive triggers with their culture. This is one of the reasons we have, like, Independence Day parades and Flag Day and all these kind of things. We have these big festivals where there's special food and fireworks and all this. So people associate those things with that culture and with that society, and we're hoping that they get a positive enough experience to create a trigger. So if we want to train someone in Krishna conscious culture, it would be wise to be aware of what triggers we are creating. For example, let's say you want to train somebody to chant Hare Krishna. And you have a certain time, you get together as a family and you chant. You get together in a certain place. So you're talking about the place, the time, and the activity. And let's say that during that place and time and activity, you're really giving your children a hard time. Why are you sitting like that? You should sit up straight, you should chant like that. Why aren't you chanting? What are you doing? So I met one girl who was raised in the Hare Krishna movement, loves Krishna consciousness, but she doesn't like to chant on beads. She said, when I was a child, if I didn't chant properly, I was punished. She said, I can't even touch beads. She said, as soon as I touch the beads, I pull my hand back. I can't do it. So the last thing is positive emotional experiences. Positive emotional experiences. So if we could go through them.
Stories,
Meaningful service. Experience.
Positive emotional experiences. Okay, I know it's late and you're all tired, but let's try that again.
Love and trust, stories, meaningful service, emotional.
Radha Gopinath ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai.